The British far right has flooded TikTok and other forums of social media with their hate mongering. They try to racialize every issue and try to give it a racial color. For instance, the unfortunate and highly condemnable incidents in Bradford and other parts where certain section of Pakistani community or some accused who were from Pakistani community were involved in crimes. But the question is that if they were involved in crimes, they should be dealt in accordance with the law. In all parts of the world, a criminal is considered a criminal without regard to his color, his nationality, his language. For instance, Jeffrey Epstein, who was a white American, he was involved in the luring, hundreds of girls, possibly more than 1,000. And Clean Maxwell, who was a white British woman, she would also trap such minor girls. One of the members of royal family was also accused of sexually assaulting a minor girl, and but on the basis of that, we would not say Glenn Maxwell, white British, or Jeffrey Epstein, white American. We will simply call them criminals because they were criminals, they were involved in crime, so they were dealt with in accordance with law. So if you just talk about one particular race, what does it mean that if such thing had happened with any non-white British girl, that would not have been crime, that would still have been called a crime. So a crime should be considered a crime, and a criminal should be considered a criminal, no matter what is his religion, caste, and creed. On that basis, it cannot be said that this particular section of community or this particular section of any society is responsible for all the ills of society. Even the total sexual assaults or sexual crimes that happened in the UK in 2024, that are around 71,000. Most of them were committed by the people who were not from uh, immigrant backgrounds. So does it mean that only those who that were committed by the people having immigrant background would be pointed out and the rest would be left? So in that case, we cannot do justice because we are just ignoring an overwhelming majority of the people who have committed this crime. So we should not racialize this issue of crimes. And as far as crimes are concerned, there have been crimes in every society. That doesn't mean that we should single out one community or another community. If a crime or an injustice is done to a white British girl or a non white British girl, the law should spring into action. The law enforcement agency should be spring in action, and the law should be allowed to take its own course. For instance, if we talk about 19th century or middle of 17th century, at that time, immigrants were almost non-existent in the British society. But there are incidents where criminals targeted girls as young as 3 years, 7 years, 8 years. They were criminals, and of course they did not have any immigrant background. The same way during the industrial revolution and in the aftermath of industrial revolution, so many women, working class, especially working class women, were sexually assaulted. And if we keep the definition of sexual assault, or modern definition of sexual assault, or today's definition of sexual assault, then such cases would have run in tens of thousands every years. So during the industrial revolution, we see that during the first and second world war, hundreds of thousands of women were sexually assaulted across Europe. And naturally, it was not committed by immigrants, it was the local indigenous European soldiers who were accused of that. So we cannot turn a blind eye to these horrible crimes by saying that they were committed by the people of a different race. So, but the far right has always tried to give it a racial color. Even if we look at the list of serial killers from 19th century onwards. Most of them, or rather an overwhelming majority of them, is not from immigrant background. Does it mean that they should not be punished? They should not be dealt in accordance with law? Does it mean that those women who were targeted by these serial killers and rapists, their voice, a voice for them should not be raised? So, racializing any crime, racializing any inhuman act is not a justice with the victims. It is rather, an injustice with victim. So we can talk about different claims of the far right, their propaganda, and we will go one by one. There is another propaganda of the far right, that most of the houses are being taken away by immigrants, which is not true. And some people, like on the far right side, or some people on the right, they claim that, for instance, in London, they claim that 40 more than 40% houses have been claimed by non-British or non-white, or those who are not citizen. But it turned out that it was only the 14% people from immigrant background who had such housing. So in England, what they actually try to hide is the rapaciousness of the rich people, or the aristocrats, or the elite. And in this tiny section of elite, you can have people. Of course, overwhelming majority is white British, but there could be people from Jewish background, Muslim background, Hindu background, and other background. They are just they are just the part of elite. They have deep pockets, and anybody can have deep pockets without regard to their caste and creed. So the reason as to why housing crisis is getting severe in the UK is because of the monopoly of a few families, or maybe monopoly of a few sections of the elite, who have occupied more than 50% of England's land. For instance, the traditional aristocracy owns 30% of England's land, and corporations, most of whom are owned by white British, they own 18% of England's land, and banks and newly rich, which might include more white and both non-white, 17% is owned by them. Ordinary British people only own 5% of England's land, while the government owns only 8% of England's land. In the same way, when we talk about rental crisis, again the far right activists say that it is because of the immigrants. But in reality, because of COVID, many people could not pay mortgage, so they might have sold their homes, or they might have to withdraw their from their homes. So today, just one British company owns more than 11,000 rental properties. More than 11,000 rental properties. Just one British bank owns more than 4,000 rental properties. People like Nigel Farage, Matthew Goodwin, and lumpen proletariat leader of the far right, Tommy Robinson, he will never talk about this. So housing crisis, if we look at housing crisis, again, it is because of the elite, and most of the sections of elite come from, of course, white British, and it means that it has nothing to do with race. It is again a class issue. And then they also talk about that immigration is illegal. Naturally, the British government is the part of international covenant, the rule based system that was developed in the aftermath of 1945, after the Second World War. The UK was one of the pioneers of that rule based system. So either the UK should pull out itself from that rule based system. But if the UK is a signatory to different international laws, if it is a signatory to international covenants, if it is signatory to international different agreements, it is bound under the international law to follow that. And under international law, providing asylum to people who are feeling persecution uh, is not illegal at all. But the far right has propagated this, including people like some people on the right, like Matthew Goodwin and Nigel Farage. Does it mean that the UK wants to live in isolation? Does it mean that it does not want to live in the Committee of Nations? Does it mean that it does not recognize the authority of the United Nations and its different bodies that are working for immigration, asylum seekers, that are working on education, that are working on health and other problems? So either the far right should ask the government to pull out of these all agreements, or it should isolate itself from the international system, which was of course the countries that established that international system. UK was also among those countries. It was naturally one of the global powers. So it is a widely held perception that providing asylum is illegal. It's not illegal, neither under international laws, nor it is illegal under the British laws. And then another argument of the far right, I've written some notes and I'm talking about that. And such propaganda, of course, is being propagated by um, the leaders of the far right who happen to be from elite class. They have studied at expensive schools, studying at expensive universities, making a lot of money. Like, for instance, GB News Honor is being accused of fomenting this hatred through his propaganda. There are some people on the left who have been accusing him. Similarly, Matthew Goodwin is accused of being from elite class, who doesn't know anything about working class and about their problems. In the same way, Nigel Farage is accused of being from elite class or rich class, who has nothing to do an ordinary British person. It is perhaps one of these reasons when they talk about sexual crimes of a particular community, they never talk about the honor of Herod, who was also accused of subjecting many women, to sexual assault because he was a rich guy. Similarly, somebody who was in the network of Jeffrey Epstein and who is from the UK and who was accused of sexually assaulting a white girl, no voice was raised for that particular white girl. So they just try to rationalize. It means they just try to see, perhaps they try to see this issue on class basis as well. So Jeffrey Epstein, who was a rich guy, Clean Maxwell, who was a rich woman, you would never hear uh, Matthew Goodwin or Nigel Farage and Tommy Robinson talking about those white girls. So they just try to rationalize this issue. So we are talking about different claims of far right. Another claim of the far right, which is also exaggerated, that the government is spending a huge amount of money on immigrants and asylum. Even the exaggerated figure says it is hardly £2 billion, most of which goes to hotels, catering provider, service provider, transport provider, and again, most of these hotels honor are white British. On the other hand, the government has been spending billions of dollars on Trident, which has nothing to do with an ordinary British person. The defense budget for 2024 is also more than £54 billion. If the same amount is spent on schools, hospitals, on infrastructure, on police, things much improve. There won't be any rush at all. Perhaps nobody will have to wait. But the point that the far right would not highlight, if there is no rush at NHS, then who would go to private hospitals? So crowded NHS in a way benefits private hospital, because if everybody can easily go to private NHS, then who would want to spend money, at private hospitals? So when it comes to the amount, the money or the billions of dollars that the government is spending on defense. They do not want to talk about that. There is no reason for the modernization of trident. Many on the left would argue because the biggest enemy of the UK was the Soviet Union, and we have already seen the demise of Soviet Union. Warsaw Pact that was created to challenge countries like like the UK, France, and the United States. It was dismantled long time ago, so there is no justification for this spending. But naturally, such spending is being carried out to extend benefit to certain companies. So we will talk about some more claims of far right in our part two. So this is part one, discussing the claims and distortion and lies of the far right.